like kind of Brady Bunch by the beach, in the sense
Brady
that
Bunch by the beach.
it's
Okay.
a very Brady Bunch community, built in the mid '60s. You got mid-century homes.
That's Joseph, and this is about his beautiful Brady Bunch neighborhood, a neighborhood that he and his kids used to live in.
5% of the homes are either damaged in a minor way, um, or are standing. The rest, the majority, preponderance of the homes in the community have been completely burned down. And so,
Whoa, I'm sorry. That makes that what you mean is a 95% of your neighborhood is
yes,
burnt?
yes, yes.
Joseph and I went to law school together and have remained close friends for 28 years now. And let me tell you how this episode came about, the personal story of my friend and the calamity that has struck his community in my History Behind News program. If you remember, last week I told you that from time to time I would do some episode on my own, peel the history behind news myself without a guest, and I told you why and in what occasions I would do that. So, true to my word, I prepared an episode about the history of urban fires, from Rome to London and then to San Francisco, with a little bit of Napoleon Bonaparte, ancient Persia, and medieval China thrown in there. But when I was writing the news part of my podcast, the news for the history behind news, I realized that I was essentially relaying to you guys, the news peelers, my audience, what Joseph, my friend, had told me about his neighborhood. And I decided that's ridiculous. It's like hearsay, me telling you what he told me. So I asked Joseph to do the news part of my podcast for just a couple minutes, not longer. But you see, Joseph has lived in coastal Los Angeles and in Malibu for years. So he told me about its history.
The Topanga Motor Hotel, it was called. It was there, but it had been shut down. It's on county land. It was built by William Randolph Hearst about 100 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Completely burned down, no longer there.
And since Joseph is a professor at Pepperdine Business School focusing on legal issues within real estate, we got into the legal ramifications of the LA fires.
That's called foreseeability, as you know, under the law.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
a premise for having a duty, and a failure and to actually act on that duty of care are the elements of basic negligence. And if you add a gross element of $150 billion in damages, as again has been discussed as the damages of the Palisades fire alone, that is legally the definition of gross negligence if you were to apply it to governmental agents.
Joseph is also a C-level executive in a real estate investment and development firm that manages over $1 billion worth of assets. So I asked him this. Would you invest in an area like this, not knowing whether or not the governments, local and bigger governments, are going to prevent the next fire?
So it's a wonderful question. First of all, it's quite early, and I think there have been discussions, the ATF,
You can see why I decided to
and
turn my conversation with
federal
Joseph into a
authorities
full
are
podcast episode,
investigating the
because I
causes
learned so much
of
from
the
him and I
Palisades
wanted
fire
to
and
share
the
that with you.
cause.
And not to worry, I'll share with you my own podcast about the history of urban fires next week and tell you about the history of why firefighters fought each other to put out fires. I mean that literally. Fistfights broke out between firefighters. For now, let's go back to Joseph's neighborhood. His children are doing something wonderful. They have started a GoFundMe page to help out their neighbors in this tragedy. And I've dropped a link to their GoFundMe page in the detailed description of this episode, where I've also provided more information about Joseph's professional accomplishments, of which there are many. So stay with me as my dear friend, Professor Joseph Soleiman, and I peel the history behind Los Angeles fires. Welcome to History Behind News. I'm Adel Ali, your host. This is not just a history program, and it's not at all a news program. I interview scholars from all over the world, 150 and counting, who distill their many decades of research into an hour conversation to explain to us in rich detail and with fascinating stories how we got to our current moment in history. So my guest scholars help me peel the history behind developments and trends we're told about or should be told about in our news.
I can tell you, speaking to a lot of the people in the neighborhood, not only in the Palisades, but really it's impacted so much more, going all the way out to as far as, our adjacent cities, Calabasas, people who live in, all the way out to Westlake, Thousand Oaks, and even, those areas, people are angry. They're angry at the municipal government. They're angry at the city of LA. These are people who live in Ventura County, look at it and go like, what has it become? And why is it?
Why angry at the city of LA?
Well, remember, they're now in different cities. The city of Calabasas, it's its own municipality, right?
So is Malibu, right?
Malibu is its own. Westlake, Agoura, all of these minor little cities, and they call them minor, not out of a derogatory sense, but they're small towns, but they have a constituency that they directly report to. The city of LA is massive, right? The constituency in Pacific Palisades, for example, noted to be very wealthy, very well-to-do, isn't the same as the constituency maybe in, on the east side or South LA, and very different demographics, very different sensitivities to needs. And you've got probably the largest concentration of single-family residences on the west side, which is what was impacted relative to other parts of the city that is really much more attuned to multifamily, style of living. So you have
versus like big mansions that we are used to seeing on TV about Malibu or whatever, right?
Yeah. And they're not all mansions, right, that were destroyed. Some of them, the Palisades was originally built in the early 1920s. Really, a lot of those homes, some exist, sort of 1920s, 1940s homes that are quite small in stature. What gets a lot of the attention is the larger homes, the celebrity homes, the ostentatious, yards and
yeah.
But there is and this is the big issue in the real, I think, sad side of the result of these fires, both not only in the Pacific Palisades and Malibu, but also in Altadena. You've got people who've lived in these homes in some cases on a generational basis. In my neighborhood, this is a great example. I mean, I know some people who've lived in their homes, the homes where their parents is, and they've inherited them, and they themselves are now, 60, 70 years old, right? So these are people.
So very low tax base.
Yes, low tax basis, but these are people who are home rich, equity rich, but really not rich from an income standpoint, right? And because of that, they're living in these wonderful homes, but they're not people that are making 100, 200, 300, million to $5 million a year, right? So these are the people that are going to be impacted by these fires, where you have a home that's been decimated and you can't really afford to build that home because you don't have the income to do it. These are people that are going to be forced to sell.
So if I may just pause here for a second. So these are people that live in homes that may be $4, $5, $6, $10 million, but they're not even making $200,000 a year. I mean, generally speaking. So their home is gone. They have an immediate financial issue, right? Because that was their wealth that was passed down from prior generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I mean, most of people, there's a certain level where you've got trusts and the money is available to rebuild.
Yeah.
But on a very basic level, there are some, neighborhoods. My neighborhood I use as an example because I called it, kind of, what was it called? Like kind of Brady Bunch by the beach, in the sense
Brady Bunch by the beach. Okay.
It's a very Brady Bunch community, built in the mid 60s. You got mid-century homes. They're all relatively small homes. Everyone thinks of Malibu as being the home of, mansions. You've got homes around 2,000 to, on the large side, maybe 3,500 to 4,000 square feet. But A lot of them are smaller single family residences, and a lot of them were built. When they were built, they were bought by, you know, first generation kind of post World War II folks that had maybe just, they were 20, they were buying their first home in that neighborhood. They bought it, at that time, it may have been a hefty sum, but they kept it in the family. And I know of at least two people who are now themselves elderly, but they had inherited the house from the original, their parents who were the original owners of those houses. They are now impacted. I know in one case the house has been completely devastated; it's gone, and I worry for them because I know that the income isn't there to allow them to, you know, have the means to rebuild. You're talking about $550 a square foot to rebuild these houses now, so you can do the math, right?
Wow.
It's
Wow.
going to be expensive, and not everyone has that amount of money. Insurance, of course, is the other
I was just going to ask about that. Go ahead,
big
please.
elephant in the room. I was with State Farm. A lot of my neighbors were with State Farm, and State Farm was dropping us.
I remember a phone call with you, Joseph, some time ago, and I was complaining that my State Farm insurance has gone up, and you said, "Go, buy it with both hands because we're losing." I'm paraphrasing here. Our insurance here in the sort of LA area, and this probably has made it worse, right?
Oh yeah. So they were methodically dropping people in kind of like redlining, effectively people in high brush warning zones and fire zones. Our neighborhood was a good example. A lot of my neighbors were having to find other types of insurance at multiples of what we were paying in terms of premiums.
When did that start happening? Back in 2024 or even way before that?
For me, it started, I was one of the lucky or maybe misfortunate ones that started getting the notice. I believe I got the notice in 2020, late 23 or 24. And then, so I've had now, after State Farm, I had another insurer called Stillwater, but then there was no insurers that were willing to, for this year, 2024, 2025 season, I had no admitted insurers that were willing to insure me. So I had to go to an unadmitted insurer. The unadmitted insurer's premium was so high, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was the price of a small subcompact automobile. So I, like many of my neighbors, had to go to what's called the California Fair Plan, which is basically a fund that was created by the state of California for people who were otherwise uninsurable because there were no insurance companies willing to take on the property insurance risks associated with the location of their home, whether in the mountains or by the ocean in this case. And so,
is that a good plan? Are you happy with that option?
It's notoriously limited. It's notoriously limited, but it is notoriously under market in terms of premium. So you're paying an incredibly low premium, and you are, don't have all the bells and whistles of a traditional admitted lender because it is effectively a state fund that you're dipping into. There should be a loss. And that's the one concern right now. We've got whole communities of homes that have been destroyed. You might have, 5 to 10% of the homes remaining. There have been estimates of losses on the order of $150 billion just for the Palisades fire alone. And, the California Fair Plan policies may not actually have enough in the coffers to be able to make all of those obligations whole. So it's an issue, I think. And it's an issue, again, going back full circle to the initial issue that you raised about misgovernance and the failure of our government officials, where, on the state level, as far as the state of California's insurance commissioner goes, and, their requirements not to allow the insurers to really price premiums on a market rate basis is what has caused us to have to now rely on our government. And now we're finding ourselves potentially with a government that's underfunded.
But if they price premiums at market levels,
They would go up,
they would go up
but they would also come down
because
because
they would be competitive.
they'd have to compete.
Yeah, interesting. Funny how market economy works when government doesn't interfere, right?
We can talk about rent control too.
Yeah. Joseph, you're here as a dear friend of mine and in a personal capacity, but you're also a scholar, a professor at Pepperdine Business School, and you deal with legal issues in real estate. This is a big question, and I hadn't anticipated this to ask you this, but I feel like I must. Do you foresee big changes in the law, a lot of lawsuits, just the whole sort of the way we look at this? I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of what the law is or individual homeowners suing. I'm talking about the big picture.
Yeah. So there are a few different components. Number one, how will the Palisades fire and the Eden fire really impact people's perspectives on local governance? There has been, and I can answer kind of what I'm seeing in the community is a tremendous amount of pushback to how we've been a one state city and state, city of Los Angeles, specifically in the state of California, where we've been so blue that, one party has really had its way, and that party hasn't been checked and balanced by a counterparty. So there's a lot of
okay. So you're talking about the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, not to become. I don't like being political. When in class, I try very hard to avoid political conversations because real estate and the law can be really, I think, tainted by politics. Okay. But I'm speaking factually that there is discussions about our leadership failing, right? The mayor of I live in Malibu, so she's not my mayor, but the mayor to the second largest city in the country, failing its people. Having been warned firsthand by the highest ranks of the fire department just 6 months ago that they need additional funding or there could be something like this happening. That's called foreseeability, as you know, under the law. That is a premise for having a duty and a failure to actually act on that duty of care are the elements of basic negligence. And if you add a gross element of $150 billion in damages, as again has been discussed as the damages of the Palisades fire alone, that is legally the definition of gross negligence if you were to apply it to governmental agents.
Wow, you're taking me back to my law school days. And to compound all of that, this foreseeability is happening in a state that you get fires all the time. We're not talking like, this is not a fire department in Vermont saying, let's bulk up.
Further contextualizes it, doesn't it?
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So you used the word community several times, and with respect to your own community, you said it's the Brady Bunch by the beach. I love that. Is there a community left?
So that's the biggest tragedy as relates to these fires. The places that you would traditionally, my bank is gone, my grocery store is gone, where I would go to get coffee, two different structures, whether you're talking about your Starbucks or your kind of third wave roaster coffee shop, those buildings don't exist. So community is a place where you go, where you congregate, you see other families, and you create memories.
Are your neighbors there?
So what I'm saying is those don't exist. So community, speaking of community, I mean, those structures physically aren't there. And so community doesn't have a place necessarily to congregate. And that's a huge loss, right? So a neighborhood is that, and that
Yeah.
neighborhood's been decimated effectively. Uh, so there's a lot of rebuilding that will happen. And I say will happen very directly because it's a very strong community of people that are very tight, people who, have each other's backs and who come together. And this has been happening in a very dramatic way, actually, over the last week since the fires broke out.
So I know that your home is still intact, thank God. But how about your neighbors? I just want to make sure I
So
don't
my
forget to ask that.
neighborhood is probably 5% of the homes are either damaged in a minor way or are standing. The rest, the majority, preponderance of the homes in the community have been completely burned down. And
Whoa,
so,
I'm sorry. That makes that what you mean is a 95% of your neighborhood is
yes,
burnt?
yes, yes, yeah.
That's
And I only saw
that's
this yesterday because there
apocalyptic.
was
That's like
it is it is. I mean, there was just a county of Los Angeles assessment of the neighborhood where they went through house by house and did an assessment. And the houses that have been completely burned down are red. The houses that are standing are black. Houses that have seen minor damage or very light damage are either green or yellow. The majority of the map for the neighborhood, like I said, 95% of the homes are red. The whole streets, like from the top of the street down, every single house has been burned down. Yeah, and these are families. These are families that are
wow.
with children that were going to my children's schools. My children would play with my friends' children, and they can't be in the neighborhood now. So the neighborhood will be devoid of that kind of experience of families being able to have their kids play, or kids running in the streets, or meeting up for let's go to the park and hang out. They just are not going to be in the neighborhood. It's quite sad. So you can talk about survivor's guilt, but there's also something completely lost to us who are blessed enough to have a house where we just we're just kind of on an island now. It's very strange.
So are you planning at some point to go back and start living there? Just how
I
about
am.
your kids?
Yeah.
How does that
Yeah.
work?
Yeah, that's the big issue. We're having a discussion about how our kids are going to go to school,
Yeah.
where what it's going to look like. I think the community will go into heavy rebuild mode. We have a lot of people who are attorneys, a lot of people who are real estate people in the community, a lot of people who have the resources, and I mean non-monetary resources, but also the understanding of how to rebuild. So I think that we're gonna have a lot of people putting all hands on deck. We're all reaching out to each other. We're asking each other how we can assist each other with temporary housing right now. That's become very difficult. There are issues related to price gouging that affects us all, right? And so they're suffering from demand supply drivers that have been put in tremendous imbalance because there's so much demand now for rental housing, and with the burnout of supply, such a limited supply of available housing for these people to relocate to.
Do you think there'll be price gouging also on building material? Remember, for example, after the supply crisis that we had during COVID.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there are only so many general contractors that are going to be available to do the type of work that's necessary.
Yeah.
And that simple, restrictive, number of people who are capable of rebuilding is going to cause, I think, some people to again, those with resources are going to find their general contractors. Some I know have already reached out to their contractors. The first thing is the work of cleanup, getting, bobcats in there to demo out these lots. In some cases, again, these were mid-century buildings. You have to make sure you clear it. They're clear the lots of asbestos. There's in some cases, the paint that was being used was lead-based paint. So it's going to require some remediation, number one. Number two, then it's, getting plans going. And that's in the other part of at least our state officials and our city officials coming together. The good news is that we are being Oceanside, we are a coastal commission governed. Being in California, of course, CEQA governs everything that we do. So those have been temporarily both put on hold by our governor, which is good. It was just a couple of days ago where that happened. So you now can rebuild your home within 110% of the square footage of what existed before the fire in the same exact location as it was. So that does help. There are limitations to that, kind of mandate as well, because you can't, and it'd be a great opportunity if you could add ADUs, as the state now does allow additional dwelling units to be put on parcels to the extent there is space. But the mandate by the governor kind of doesn't allow for ADUs at this point, but it does allow.
Please remind our audience what ADU stands for, please.
ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit. It's basically like your grandmother's flat in the back.
In-laws in the back.
In-laws unit. Yeah.
For the last few days, I've been reading a lot, and then to the extent that I watch TV, just seeing on CNN, Fox News, and other channels about looting, and there are some residents that just won't leave because they fear whatever remains of their property may be a victim of looting. So tell me about your neighborhood. Is this a thing?
It is a thing. So we've all been in a mandatory evacuation order, on a mandatory evacuation order since about a week ago.
Yeah.
So we've not been able to get back in, and as of, I believe it was Thursday of last week, it's been a hard closure. So
what do you mean hard closure?
Meaning that they do not allow, they've closed off access points into Pacific Palisades burn areas, as well as the Malibu burn areas. We have now National Guard members that have been tasked with preventing people from going into those burn areas. That includes residents. So that's got a good side and a bad side. The positive of that is that it should restrict exactly what you alluded to. Unfortunately, we've got deplorables, and I call them deplorables because I think that if you are someone who has a mindset to go into someone's neighborhood and further devastate a family that's already been devastated by fire to the point where they don't have anything left, or if they have something left standing, to then go in and cause ex post facto damage after a fire. It just is the most deplorable type of person to do.
You're being way too kind with your choice of words, Joseph.
There have been 40 arrests thus far. So
I'm sorry?
There have been 40 arrests of people that have actually been doing this kind of thing.
Who the hell does that? Who does that? In addition to being affected firsthand by the fires and your own scholarly work in real estate, you've also had a long and successful career that I've been witnessing for 2.5 decades now in real estate, and now you're a principal in a company that manages more than $1 billion worth of real estate. The reason I bring this up is this: you just told me that there will be heavy rebuild mode. Those were your words. How will the investment into all of this work? Right? As an investor, what goes through an investing institution's or an investing person's mind?
Well, there are a few different stages, right? The first stage is really right now, everyone's, if you own real estate in the burn areas, number one, you're talking to your insurance company everyone should be putting a claim in. The trouble is, you have to get secondhand information to assess whether or not the building or the home that is at issue has been burned. Remember, we're all still locked out of access to these burn
Yeah,
areas.
yeah.
So there are then, so you've got to go through your insurance company. The areas have been declared disaster areas, so that allows for federal aid by way of FEMA to come in, as well as the SBA on a state level to come in and give low interest rate loans to people that have been affected. So those are all resources that are available, number one. Number two, the issue, and I think the calculus becomes, while you can build your home by right on an expedited basis, what does that look like from a permitting standpoint for commercial properties? Whether it's an office building, I have a friend that I know who owns an office building in the Pacific Palisades area that was completely burned down. It catered specifically to residents who lived in Pacific Palisades and wanted to office close to their residents. And, so, those, and it's interesting because as an asset type, it's an office asset type property, and office has been significantly damaged since COVID because we no longer, office and physical offices. We do Zooms. So,
commercial real estate also, Joseph, for my own edification, also includes shopping centers.
Correct. Yes. So
which is vital to neighborhood, as you were telling me. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So we're talking about on the retail side, you're talking about your grocer anchored shopping centers. We're talking about mixed retail. Think of your ground floor retail with maybe office, your yoga studio, or studios up above. We're talking about historic properties. In one case, a very well-known investment company here owned what was historically known as the Santa Monica Water Building, built in the 1920s. Beautiful Spanish-style building with arches that had ground floor retailers like Starbucks, restaurants that we would all frequent, real estate offices, and then on end cap was Bank of America, was my bank. That in its entirety has burned down, historic asset.
So do you think rebuilding those is going to have some sort of bottleneck through the permitting process? Is that it?
So there will definitely be, the interesting part of that is absolutely, there's going to be a complete surge of applications going into the planning departments as well as the Department of Building and Safety. The interesting portion of that is that, from what I understand, for the city of LA side of things anyway, there has been some excess capacity in terms of people in the building department that would be able to process these. So I think the queue is going to be long. We really need people in the housing department on the one hand, as relates to the city of Los Angeles, and the building and permitting departments of the city of Los Angeles to really expedite those, whether we're talking commercial assets or otherwise. Again, the commercial assets are really integral to this community because, if you've got a home and you don't have a place to go shopping, it's, we're talking about, what do you have?
How's that going to work? Where do you get the milk? Let me go back to the question that I asked you about investors and your perspective of 25 plus years of working as an investor in real estate. Would you come back? Let's put the neighborhood and the neighbors who have a vested interest in living there aside for a moment.
Sure.
Would you invest in an area like this, not knowing whether or not the governments, local and bigger governments like LA and then Malibu or whatever, are going to prevent the next fire? Do you see what I mean? That's like a big question. It's like, okay, I have $40 million to invest here. I actually like to invest a lot more. Let's say a real estate company, put more money to work. What about the next fire?
So it's a wonderful question. First of all, it's quite early And I think there have been discussions, the ATF and the federal authorities are now investigating the causes of at least the Palisades fire to see if it was wildfire, or if it was something that was arson or created by individuals. And the suspicion, by the way, amongst a lot of the community has been that this was, yes, we know that we had 70, 80 mile per hour hurricane, gale force winds, no question about it. But
they've been warned about this sort of situation.
Right. And so, but there's something, what was that tinder that got it going? Yeah. What's the cause? And I think that once determined will also be probative to answer your question, whether people will want to come back into these communities.
Yeah.
If you know that it wasn't just, fluke or a wildfire, but that it was sadly man-made or created, then I think that's going to be one element that will go into people's decision making. The other thing that will go into it is the irrefutable fact that we're talking about some of the most rugged, beautiful coastline, I think, in the country, if not the world. I mean, we have had innumerable movies, television shows, reality shows, commercials, all filmed along this coastline due to that just absolute irrefutable beauty. So that's going to drive people. People are going to want to surf, live, by the beach.
Joseph, do you remember that you and I think on more than one occasion, correct me with the name of this restaurant, went to Duke's? Mm-hmm. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Wow, that was a long time ago. Is that gone?
No, Duke's is standing. What's gone, sadly, is Moonshadows. Moonshadows was.
I've never been, but I've heard. Yeah.
An institution. If you've ever, kind of driven through Pacific Coast Highway through Malibu, Moonshadows is one of those stops. It was on wood pylons, kind of cantilevered over to the ocean. It was a wonderful place to take a date or to take your spouse. It's actually where I worked when I was in college. It's the first place I attended college, and sadly, it's no longer gone. No longer there. It is gone. You've got several institutions. Look, the heritage that is Malibu has to do with driving PCH in some ways. Seeing these roadside cafes, just along Topanga and PCH was a wonderful Thai restaurant that I had frequented for as long as I lived in Malibu. Completely burned down. Chelada Beach Thai Cafe right across from Topanga Beach, completely gone. Little beach bungalow, just as if it was never there. Bait shop next door, completely gone. The Topanga Motor Hotel, it was called. It was there, but it had been shut down. It's on county land. It was built by William Randolph Hearst about 100 years ago.
Wow.
Completely burned down, no longer there. Malibu Feed House, completely burned down, no longer there. To the point where
these are not replaceable.
Yeah, correct. I mean, these are not. You can't replace something that was built 100 years ago.
Yeah. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for coming on to my program. It's a funny thing. I contacted you as a dear friend to come, and you indulged me last minute. And we thought we were going to have a brief, sort of an informal conversation. What I should have done from the beginning is call you Professor Soleiman instead of Joseph, because you ended up teaching me and our audience so much about real estate history and investing. I wish you, your family, and everyone in your neighborhood the best. And I hope they cut all the red tape for you guys to get back and just have a neighborhood, like a community.
Thank you, Adele. I love your podcast. Thank you so much. It was an honor for me to come. I just ask one thing. Have me on to come more about good things in real estate, hopefully soon.
Oh, I love that. I look forward to it. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Joseph, as we were closing off, you have something else to share that I think our audience would want to know. It's a wonderful effort. Go ahead, share that with me. Your family is involved.
Yeah, we are trying to, as I discussed, about 95% of the homes in our neighborhood have been completely burned down to ash. A lot of families have been displaced, that we're trying to raise money for, who need clothes. They literally left with nothing but maybe a suitcase. So we're trying to help raise money for families affected by this fire. We've established a GoFundMe page that's actually been established by my twin boys and some of their friends who have been all...
How wonderful is that? Wow.
Yeah, they've been firsthand affected and they want to do good for the community. So I'll share that with you so that you can maybe help those who would like to make...
For sure. I will post it.
And 100% of the funds go back to people who have been directly impacted and have lost their houses.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me, Joseph.
Thank you.
The opinions and statements of our guests are their own. We neither agree nor disagree with them. We're only interested in the perspective they provide through history. At History Behind News, we're honored that our guests share their expertise with us, most of which are based on years of scholarship and research, and we provide links to their projects and publications for your benefit to review them if you wish. Otherwise, we're not affiliated with our guests. We just think they teach us pretty cool history, the history behind our news. Also, unless we explicitly inform you, we're not affiliated with any institutions, including Amazon, for which book links are shared here from time to time for your convenience. Finally, as a reminder, we don't do news here at History Behind News. We peel the news for the history behind it. And our mission is not to provide a complete account and analysis of the past, rather is to highlight some issues and incidents in our history that may poke and prod your discerning minds into seeking some perspective for our news. And if you disagree with our take on history, well then, it means we've succeeded in getting you to think about the history behind news. And of course, share your thoughts with me by leaving your comments on Twitter or sending an email to adele@historybehindnews.com. I love to hear from you. I love to learn from you. Until next time, this is Adele with History Behind News, a history podcast for our news.